Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Yeah, hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and this is episode 59. Today we've got a brilliant interview with best-selling author Simon Toyne, telling us about how he left a lucrative job in TV to write his first novel, and now, 5 books and 6 years later, one of his books has been optioned for TV, and he's fronting his own upcoming TV series, interviewing crime writers about the true crime inspirations behind their own books. But before we dive in, just a quick update from me as the editing process continues on my own crime novel. I've been laying the book out as chapters and scenes using a technique used in screenwriting with index cards. You should read Save the Cat by Blake Snyder if you want some great tips on structure, by the way. It's been really helpful, and I've already spotted some issues with where certain incidents happen. In general, just being able to step back and really think about the whole novel has led me to some realisations about particular areas of the book, and in one case I've realised I need to entirely change the setting of one of my key scenes, which is great. I know some writers find this phase of writing painful, but to be honest, I can't wait to start rewriting certain sections, as I know they're going to be so much better because of it. So yeah, that's where I am at the moment. Let me know how you're getting on with your writing projects, or if there's any particular questions you have, either for me or for the guests that we've got on there. It'd be great to hear about what you're up to. So that's me. In terms of the show, we continue to get great feedback, and I want to thank all the people that have continued to share the show on Twitter, Facebook, and anywhere else I might have missed. Just a few mentions to Elizabeth Rivers, Kathleen A. Ryan, Maria Smith, Heidi Luz, Daniel Rebo, and Pogue Publishing. Once again, I'd encourage you to get in touch if you've got a book or project you'd like me to mention. I'm always happy to shine a light on what our listeners are up to. Okay, so let's crack on with today's interview with Simon Toyne. I had a great time chatting with Simon, speaking from his house in France, and we got to cover his own writing journey, his books, and his advice to new writers. So just a little bit about Simon if you aren't familiar with him and his work. Simon Toyne is the internationally best-selling author of the Sanctus trilogy, Sanctus, The Key and the Tower, and also the Solomon Creed series, which has been optioned for Leonardo DiCaprio's production company and is currently being developed as a major new TV series. He's also the producer and host of Written in Blood, a 10-part true crime series for CBS, where best-selling crime writers explore the true crimes that inspired their own work. The show debuts in the UK on CBS Reality this coming Sunday, September the 3rd at 10 p.m, and continues for the next 10 weeks. I'm really looking forward to checking it out, especially after my chat with Simon. So, here's our interview. Okay, Simon, thanks for coming on to Joined Up Writing Podcast. Appreciate you taking the time. How's things?
Things are good. Where am I at? I'm doing lots of things at the moment. My new book, Boy Who Saw, just came out in paperback in lots of places, and it's coming out in lots of other places. Solomon Creed is coming which was the book before that, first in the Solomon Creed series, is coming out in lots of different languages as well. So the first book's generally a year behind, so that just came out about a month ago in Italy and is coming out in France next month. So there's kind of bits and pieces to do for that. I'm on holiday in France with my holiday in inverted commas with my family, which means I spent all day in front of my laptop today. And I'm kind of working up an idea for a standalone, actually. I've already got an outline for the third Solomon Creed book, but I had this other idea which sort of niggled at me. So I've been sort of noodling away at that today, trying to make some sort of sense of it. And because sometimes with ideas, I find if you start writing them down, you kind of quickly find out the flaws in them and kind of go, oh, yeah, it's not such a thing. You can kind of abandon them. Otherwise, if you don't, they'll just kind of niggle at the back of your head, and you sort of think, "Oh, is that a really good idea that I should pay attention to?" And so it's like a small child tugging at your coat. If you can't ignore it, you have to give it some attention. Otherwise, it will just drive you mad. And so far, so good. Actually, it's kind of panning out quite good. So there's that, which is I've been doing. What else have I been doing? Oh, I've been doing final filming on this TV show I'm doing called Written in Blood, which is coming out on September the 3rd on the CBS Reality channel, which you will have. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's on the Freeview. I think it's channel 90 something. I should know that, but anyway, it's there, and Virgin, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
And Written in Blood is very exciting for anyone who likes crime and thrillers like me, because I'm hosting it, and it's 10 one-hour shows, and I speak to 10 different crime authors about a particular true crime that inspired their work. So the first episode on September the 3rd is Mark Billingham talking about the true life so-called honour killing of a girl in South London that inspired his latest book, Love Like Blood. And then there's loads of other people on it. Peter James does one, Simon Koenig does one, Alex Marwood does one. It's a stellar constellation of British UK crime writers. So yes, I've been filming for that. I've still nearly finished that. So I've been busy. I've been very busy.
Sounds like you've been really, really busy.
I've been really, really busy. I have.
And we can go into some more of those things a little bit later. But I wanted to start particularly, you mentioned there your most recent book, which was the next Solomon Creed book. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about that? Tell us, I think it was released in June, was it? Tell us what that's called and what it's about.
June 15th. So it's out in paperback and hardback, and not paper. What am I talking about? Hardback and audio and ebook is when it's out in. So it's the second in the Solomon Creed series, although you don't need to have read the first one to kind of enjoy it. They're all self-contained. It's pretty much, it's the main character, Solomon Creed, is a man. He's kind of an intriguing man who seems to know everything about everything but nothing about himself. And really the series is about him on a journey back towards himself to try and find out who he is. And during the course of that, he inevitably goes to different places that may or may not have connections to his past based on clues that he finds on himself. In this case, it's a jacket he wears, which is beautifully made clearly for him, with a label inside saying this suit has been made for Mr. Solomon Creed, which is the only way he knows his name, because he has this blank hole where his sense of identity is. And there's also an address on the label in France. So after the first book, which was set in Arizona, he sets off to France to try and find this tailor, figuring that if he was made for him, he must have spent time with him and measured him and maybe taken payment, and there might be some clues. So he arrives, he heads to this small town in the south of France, a place called Courte-Circiel, which is a real place. It's a real place that I'm currently sitting in fact. And he goes there. It's this very ancient, medieval, fortified town in the Tarn, so way in the south, in kind of like wine country. There's been vineyards there since Roman times, to try and find this old tailor. And he arrives to discover the tailor was murdered the night before he got there, in a way that seems to a sort of ritualistic way. He wasn't just murdered; he was, tortured. Really, this old 80-year-old tailor, and there was a message left on the wall in the old man's blood saying, "Finishing what was begun." And it turns out that this tailor was a survivor of one of the death camps, the Nazi death camps in the Second World War. And
do you think with your character? I mean, I've only just come to these books myself. I think I mentioned on Twitter that I've actually been listening to the first book, which is Solomon Creed in the UK and The Searcher, if anyone's listening to it or looking for it in the US. I think that's right.
That's right.
Is he quite a good character in terms of being able to, for example, with your latest novel, you're exploring all these different themes and things that you want to explore with that character, and because of the nature of his character that you don't know a lot about him and you're finding out things as you go, is he the kind of character that works well for those kind of stories and being able to transport him to different places and explore different things?
Yes, is the short answer. One of the reasons I liked the idea of kind of embarking on a series with him as a series character is that he's got a lot of stuff to discover about himself. He's got a lot of journey to go. And also he's rootless, because he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he's from. He has no baggage. As you say, he's a blank canvas, really. He's a blank sheet of paper. Yeah. And that, in the first book, well, in all the books, he's, his appearance is the same. He's very pale. He has white skin and white hair. And, he almost looks like a ghost. Some people think he's ghost. Someone in the first book describes him as looking like a beautiful marble statue that's come to life. He's physically looks like a blank sheet of paper as well as being figuratively one. He's and actually, the great thing about that when you're writing a series is that he can go anywhere. And like in the first book, he's in Arizona. In the second book, he's in France. The third book, he's going to be in England. He can go anywhere because his journey can, through his past and following the clues of who he may or may not be, can take him anywhere, which is, great it's great as a writer, but also as a reader, I think. As a reader, I know there's a great delight in going back to a certain place. That's why people like them, the Colin Dexter's Morse books and stuff like that, because the place is as much a part of the story as the characters. But also, there's lots of other things, like the Jack Reacher books, for example, where, he arrives in a different place every time. He can be in a city, he can be in a small town, he can be on the road, he can be like in a ranch in the middle of Texas, in the middle of nowhere, and there's something really appealing about that as a writer and a reader, I think, to know that you're not quite sure each time what you're getting. So there was definitely a degree of that appeal to me as a writer, figuring that, I may be embarking on who knows how many books, and, sort of wanting to sort of built in a degree of future freshness right from the beginning.
And how much of that stuff do you know at the outset, or is it, or to a certain extent, are you going on that journey with us, the reader, at the same time?
So in the first book, he doesn't know who he is, and he still doesn't know who he is. In the second book, he's still trying to figure it out. I know who he is, and I knew he was right before I wrote, chapter 1 of book 1. What I don't know is how he's going to come about the discovery of who he is. So it's a bit of both, really. I have an end point, I have a destination. But I'm not quite sure what the journey there will be. I mean, I have ideas of what I'd like to do and different landscapes I'd like to travel him across. So like the first book, he's in a desert, and the second book, he's in this very lush vineyard region of France for most of the time. And then he drives across France up to the north, and the landscape changes, which is kind of part of the story as well. I am on a bit of a journey with him, but I think that's quite a good thing as a writer, to sort of keep, to surprise yourself in the writing of it as much as. Because otherwise, I mean, I'd be very bored if all I was doing was colouring in an outline and, just going, I know exactly what he's going to do, and tomorrow I know what he's going to do. Or, that must be. I know some writers write like that, but I couldn't. But also, I do know where he's heading. So if I go wildly off beam, which I do sometimes, suddenly sort of write myself into a corner, I kind of go, well, no, he's not really heading there, is it? And so you can pull it back and start and get back on the straight and narrow again. So it's a bit of both, really. It's a kind of balancing act.
I understand initially you've got a 5-book deal with HarperCollins, and also you've got a TV series in the works as well.
Yes, 5-book deal for Solomon Books, and the first book, The Searcher, as you said, in America, has been optioned by Leonardo DiCaprio's production company and is in sort of early development as a TV series. And it's early development in the sense that they've got a writer on board. They've done an outline based on the first book. A really big director is attached, who I can't tell you who it is because all kinds of contractual reasons. And they've pitched, and some big actors have expressed interest. One in particular who's still interested, who's got a deal in various channels, and so they're pitching it there and seeing what they say. So it's sort of one of those things where it all sounds very exciting, but it all could fall apart any minute.
That's the nature of TV, yeah.
Totally. Well, before I was a writer of novels, I worked in TV for many years, so I kind of know that side of things. So even though it's great, obviously, I'm also not going to get too excited about it until I'm
crossing fingers, toes and eyes,
sitting down with a glass of wine and watching watching the opening credits on some channel.
And with that, I mean, I know a lot of these things, it completely depends on how it's sold and who it's sold to and everything like that. But as you mentioned, you have got a bit of a background in TV there. Were you at any point tempted, or were you interested to be involved in it from a writing point of view or anything like that, or was that something that was never really on the table?
No, that is on the table, and that is still on the table. When I say table, I mean, the what if table, if it all happens. At the moment, it's a very, very much a kind of imaginary table somewhere in some imaginary office somewhere in LA.
A fold away table, yeah.
It's pretty, it's all fairly what if at the moment. But no, it depends. I mean, the thing is, if it does get away with a certain actor who probably has their own production company anyway, and team of people they've worked with before. It may be that the last thing they want is the writer of the original book on board. Certainly with Appian and with E1, who are the kind of co-producers who optioned the book in the first place, I've had lots of conversations with them, and but largely just to sort of tell them about the character, who he actually is and where we're going. And I sort of talked them through the plot of the second book while I was writing it, so they kind of knew where that was going. And I've got the outline of the third book now, which I've sort of I haven't talked to them about it yet because they're still pitching book one. And in those conversations, they have definitely said that they would like me to be involved in some capacity. I mean, I'm on board as a sort of consulting producer, which is one of those kind of weird titles which can mean nothing or actually can be quite a creative role depending on how they want to play it.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's how long's a piece of string really at the moment. It's sort of, it's one of those things. It's sort of like figuring out what color your office in a house that hasn't been built yet might be.
Sure, yeah, I understand. Well, on that subject of you, we've touched on it a couple of times, what you did before you were a writer, a novel writer, should I say, a novelist. Tell me a little bit about your journey to publication with Sanctus, and in particular, I was interested by the fact that you kind of ignored the usual advice, which is don't give up your day job. You did precisely that.
Yeah, I gave up my day job because my day job was quite a full-on creative job. So I worked in television. So the job I quit to try and write a book, I was head of development for a big independent production company in the UK called Ricochet, who made things like Super Nanny and big features formatty stuff. So my job as head of development was I headed up a team of producers and researchers trying to come up with new programs. So it was quite creative, and I was and I'd pitch them to. We'd come up with ideas. We'd respond to briefs from commissioners. We'd go and pitch to commissioners. If stuff got commissioned, then I would generally oversee the pilots and then crew up a series and do all that. So it was pretty full on. I was doing, I was coming up with shows, I was pitching shows, I was making shows, I was overseeing shows, executive producing stuff, which basically means I was over the whole series and the crewing and all that kind of stuff. And the thing was, when I was young, I kind of got into TV accidentally, weirdly, because I always wanted to be. I always kind of half jokingly described myself as a failed film director, because what I really wanted to do, my first love was cinema, really. And I still do love films and studied films. I did a degree in English and drama, and a lot of the drama was kind of film modules and TV stuff. And what I really wanted to do, and what I did when I graduated, was take part-time jobs, earn a bit of money, and then write short films, make short films. This is time pre edit suites on phones and cameras on phones.
Pre-digital,
So pre-digital, and pre-offline editing as well, pre-Avid and all this kind of stuff. It was old tape. You would make an edit by playing a tape and recording on physical tape, and that was it. And that's what I wanted to do. So I made short films and scraped and begged together any equipment I could and actors and stuff, and made short films. Started writing bigger films with the idea that I would direct them. And I got things in the London Film Festival and various things. And I got a couple of scripts with some interest in them, and one that got a fair way and sort of had a casting director attached and bits of interest from actors, named actors and things. and I was rewriting it, and writing a short film or writing a low budget feature is really hard. I mean, getting it made. When you write a script is just the beginning for a movie, and you then have to line up the planets of finance and schedules of actors and all sorts of stuff, and it just never happened. So I spent about 3 years trying to get this thing off the ground. And in the meantime, I had a showreel of stuff that I directed and different things that I'd done. And I started getting jobs in TV, initially just literally making tea and toast and running tapes around and various things. But because I had this showreel and because I was obviously ambitious and keen, I started getting better jobs in television. And then when this script I wrote failed and sort of just died, and it was write something else, this is going no further. Mm-hmm. I was so tired and broke that I just took a job in television, a longer job, to get some money back together and to sort of almost recuperate. And I kind of never went back to it. I just stayed, and I kept getting better and better jobs in TV, and somehow ended up with a career. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of accidental. When I was younger, I used to call TV my well-paid bar job, in that it was part-time, but it paid better than a bar job, and it allowed me to have the time off to do stuff. Mm-hmm. But the thing was, I think then I had this career, and I was just short of my 40th birthday when I was doing that inevitable thing that people do of just slightly assessing where you are and where you've been and where you think you might be going. And I suppose I kind of, even though I was on the surface pretty successful in the career that I was doing, and I'd done lots of things, I'd worked on big shows and, BAFTA winning shows and all sorts of stuff. It kind of wasn't really what I'd set out to do. And I felt a little bit sad that really I'd never done that thing of writing the big story, which was what the movies were supposed to be. But the thing was, even when I was writing the screenplays for me to direct, I was writing stuff that wasn't really the stuff I wanted to direct. What I was doing, I was writing small scale things of people talking in room, relationship type stuff, because I knew it was cheap. No one's going to hand a first time director like the kind of money or the opportunity to direct the kind of films that I like to watch, which are the big, massive, sort of epic kind of thriller type things, Hollywood stuff. So I thought, I'd got to a bit of a rut where I was in my company. I was head of development, but making shows I wasn't particularly in love with. And I'd moved to Brighton, and the company was based in Brighton, so it was all very comfortable. And I thought, I need to do something. I need to quit my job and go back to freelancing. Because a staff job, I think, is sort of anathema to anything creative. It's too comfortable. You need to be scared a bit to be good creatively. So I figured I needed to leave anyway and go and do something else. So I thought, well, why don't I just quit and try and write this thing? And I'd always kind of fancied the idea of writing a book anyway. So I thought, well, I'm going to try and write a book. But what I'll try and do is I'll write a big movie in book form, because at least with a book, it's a finished thing. I don't have to finance it. I don't have to cast it. I can do the whole thing and write a book. And and maybe I won't be able to do it. I mean, the thing was, having worked in TV, it was a pretty good apprenticeship, because you have to be creative on demand, and you learn the discipline of just doing something, which is 90% of the battle with writing is just doing something. It doesn't matter how bad it is, because you can always improve it, but just doing something and forcing yourself to do it regularly, dig deep and sort of, tell stories endlessly and figure out the best way of telling them. So I'd done all that. So I knew I could produce something if I sit down to write a book. But whether it was going to be any good was up for question. But the only way you can discover it, anyone could discover if they can write a book, is to write a book. So we saved up a bit, my wife and I, and my two as then small children. I have three now. And they were both, my eldest at that point was 4, so she wasn't quite in school. So it wasn't a reckless thing to suddenly quit my job and move away and do all that. It wasn't going to be disruptive to her. So I quit my job and we rented out our flat in Brighton, and rented a place in the south of France, near where I'm talking to you now, because my auntie and uncle retired here about 15 years ago, and we knew the area, and so I said, hey, why don't we go there? Because I figured I was kind of future-proofing myself, because what I wanted to do is, if it failed, I didn't want to sort of refer to it as that 6 months I'd spent trying to write a book. I thought I could then refer to it as that 6 months we had that lovely adventure in France. So we packed up a van and rented a place in the south of France, and came here through the winter of 2007-8, early 2008. And we left just when things started getting really expensive, which it does here in the summer, obviously, because it's really hot and lovely. And we were there when it was really cold and wet and not so lovely, but much cheaper. And in that time, I wrote about the first 180 pages of the book that turned out to be Sanctus.
And that's kind of where it started.
And then I went back weirdly and started freelancing back at the company where I'd quit and had a really nice job, and I was doing a sort of lesser role for less money. But it was fine because I'd started this book, and it took me another year to, in between working to finish the book.
And presumably you had kind of a reason to do it at that point, because you knew that you'd kind of got this thing started and it was your baby and you knew where you were going with it. And so you had a bit more impetus to, the work thing, I suppose, wasn't such a big deal then because you knew you could do it.
Well, exactly. I mean, still partly answering your first question, I had to quit to write the book because I knew that if I tried to do it, I know lots of lawyers and people with other jobs write books at the same time as working. But I think the thing about it is with that, you've got this creative energy that's not being used at work, and so it's sort of bursting to get out. So you do your legal work or your whatever job you're doing, and then when you've got time, you do this creativity just kind of bursts out of you. If you are just mining your creativity permanently at work, when you then quit, when you leave, go home in the evening and go, right, now I'm going to start writing a novel, there's not going to be much left, or if there's anything left, it's going to be, tired. It'd be like running a marathon in the evening after running marathons all day. That one you run in the evening is not going to be your best time. And it's going to just wear you out. So I knew I had to quit and devote all of my creative resources to trying to write this book, because I wanted it to, if I was going to fail, I wanted it to fail honestly. I didn't want to kind of go, oh, well, it didn't work, but I was only half cylinders running on it, whatever. I wanted to give everything to it and frighten myself as well, and just sort of go, right, this has got to work. If this doesn't work, then it's just a big waste of time. So when I then went back to work, it was fine, because at that, I'd given 6 months to this thing, and I'd figured it all out, and I knew what the ending was, and I'd written 180 pages, and they didn't suck, and the ball was rolling. There was a degree of momentum, and also I went back doing a kind of less responsible job. I went back as an edit producer, which is basically someone who writes voiceover scripts for someone else's program. So I had very little responsibility other than just to sort of make the script good, and it was fine. And so I ended up running 3 edits on this kind of very formulaic daytime show. And I basically set up the edits in the morning, running between suites, writing bits of voiceover from the rushes and reading them into a mic, leave the editors to cut the pictures and tidy up, put the music on, make it pretty, and then spend the afternoon working on the book. So it was kind of the perfect job. I was getting paid for writing, my own book, which felt very subversive and good. And so it took about another year to finish the draft. And then I sent it off to an agent or a bunch of agents, and then finally got one who's interested, and that is my agent now.
That's good. And for people that don't know, just tell us a little bit about what that first book was and what it led to.
Well, Sanctus, it was very much came out, it was really weird. It came out in the wake of, and was very much branded as a Dan Brown style conspiracy thriller, which was weird at the time, because I never set out to write anything like that. I mean, I just set out to come up with the best idea I could that I thought would be an interesting book, and it turned out to be this. I remember when I was writing it, actually, I suddenly was aware of this phenomenon that was the Da Vinci Code. And I panicked and thought, oh my God, what if I've somehow come up with exactly that idea? So I bought the book and started reading it. And on page 1, there's this kind of killer monk. And mine's set in a monastery and has got these kind of sort of hardcore fundamentalist. And I was like, oh man, I've written the Da Vinci Code. Brilliant. But a year too late. And then I carried on reading and it was totally different. It's fine. So it was very much, basically the plot of Sanctus starts off with a man climbing to the top of this ancient mountain wherein is carved a monastery, and it's the oldest inhabited structure on Earth, and it's in a place called Ruin in southern Turkey. And inside this monastery, there is supposed to be this relic, this sacrament, which is
which is kind of believed to be the foundation stone of all Western religions, the Abrahamic religions. And so this place now it's become a kind of Lourdes, like a Santiago de Compostela sort of religious mecca, for places. I'm mixing my metaphors there, but religious kind of like place of pilgrimage, where people go. It's a bit of a tourist place now, and yet this monastery is still there, and no one knows what the sacrament is, or even if it exists, because the only people who ever have gone into this mountain are the monks who ascend on this rickety platform up to this thing, and are never seen again. They only go in, no one ever comes out. And then at the beginning of this book, a monk climbs out one of the windows, scales this unscalable vertical pillar of rock to the top, and makes the sign of the cross with his body. And there's a prophecy that, if ever the sign, this T sign of the cross, the Tau, appears on the citadel, then the citadel, which is what the name of this monastery is called, will fall. And all the news cameras come and film it, and they film it, and they actually film the monk who's been standing there for the best part of a day. Suddenly he just tumbles and falls to his death. So it's this huge news story. And it so happens that he falls in such a way that he kind of lands just outside this prescribed jurisdiction of the citadel. The citadel it's almost like a principality in itself. So the monastery at the center of this town has its own laws, and then the town that surrounds it. So a bit like, the Rome and Vatican. Exactly. And so because it's fallen out of jurisdiction, it's the metropolitan, the ruined city police's job to investigate this death of this monk. So they conduct an autopsy. I mean, obviously the cause of death is obvious. He fell to his death, but they've got to kind of see if there was anything that caused him to do it, and toxicology and all this sort of stuff. And in his stomach, they find these things that he swallowed, one of which is a piece of leather with numbers scratched on it. And so they initially think it must refer to, verses of the Bible or something like that. And then in a blinding moment of clarity, the police officer realizes that it's actually a phone number. So he dials it, and a woman answers in New Jersey, who turns out to be the sister of this man who disappeared 8 years ago, and she thought he was dead. And it turns out he went into the citadel, this monastery, and clearly something terrible happened in there. And the other things in his stomach seem to be clues suggesting that it might be revealing what the sacrament, what this relic supposedly inside the citadel is. Oh. You know that by the end of that book, you're going to find out what that thing is. And lo and behold, you do at the end of Sanctus, which is kind of the big reveal as to what this thing is, which I can't tell you what it is, obviously.
Absolutely. No, don't spoil it. So why that particular genre? Was it a genre that you like to read? You mentioned that it came initially from your desire to write these kind of big dramatic films initially. So why was it that particular genre, and was it an idea that was knocking around in your head for a while?
No, it was not. It was so as you said, I quit my job. They always say don't give up your day job. But I did for what I thought were fair reasons. Sound reasons. But I was sticking to that other one of write what you know. And I figured that in 6 months, what I needed to do is write something that was close to my own experience, because then I didn't need to research much, which meant, I wouldn't have to waste a lot of my time reading up on stuff to get it right. So with that in mind, I kind of had 2 or 3 ideas that I'd been working on, while I was running up to leaving my job. Mm-hmm. And they were very much sort of Hitchcockian, kind of Harlan Coben-esque, ordinary man gets thrown into extraordinary circumstances type thrillers, straight thrillers. Mm-hmm. One of which involved a TV producer who gets their footage. Who's going through the rushes on an edit and thinks he might have seen something that that might be evidence to a crime, one of those kind of situations. And I thought I was going to write, I had 2 or 3 of these ideas, and I was sort of mulling them over, and I was pretty sure I was going to write one of them. I was going to figure out what the best one is, work them up like I would work up a TV show idea, write 2 or 3 pages outlining what the idea was and themes and stuff. And then I kind of mull it over, figure out what the best one was, and then just launch into it. But also, as I said, we decided to go to France for a bit of an adventure at the same time. And we also went in winter because it was cheaper. And the idea was that my wife and I were going to take the midnight ferry from Newhaven to Dieppe, which is a 4.5-hour crossing, sleep in a little cabin on the way. You can book a cabin and go across, drive the 9 hours down to the rented house in the Tarn, and then make it all nice, basically fill it with stuffed toys and various things for the children. And then they were going to fly out with my mum and dad a couple of days later to their new rented house that would look like home because it had all their stuff in it. That was the plan. But of course, we're going in winter because it's cheaper, and so it's the 1st of December. So we dutifully turn up at Newhaven, me in a cheap van that we bought, an old Ford Transit full of stuff, and my wife in our car. We get onto the ferry, and even before we leave harbour, you can feel the movement in the boat, which you normally can't. And we set out, and there's a wind whistling around, and this force 8 gale just whips up in the channel because it's December the 1st, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and we come out of Newhaven Harbour, and the ship turns round, ferry turns round, and we get hit by this enormous wave that makes the whole ship lurch, and then everything in duty free smashes. So the whole boat filled with this unearthly smell of whiskey and perfume, and all mixed together with diesel fumes, and and the charming sound of long distance lorry drivers throwing up all around us. And we, the plan was to sleep, but we just clung on to our little cots, just hoping we were going to make it. It was horrendous. It was the worst crossing I've ever been on. It was, it was like a fairground ride. This thing, we're moving around so much. So we arrive in Dieppe, just happy to be alive, and crawl off the thing. And there's no way we can embark on the 8-hour drive. So we limp inland, looking for somewhere to stay. And about 40 minutes inland from Dieppe is Rouen. And as we drove in, looking for a cheap hotel to get our head down for a few hours, I saw the spire of Rouen Cathedral. And for some reason, I have no idea why, this quote that I'd read years ago and really liked just popped into my head, which is a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, which is, "A man is a god in ruins." And there was something about this site of this spire of Rouen Cathedral and the play on words of ruin and Rouen, that just something happened. And often, ideas are just a collision of two things that just, get you going, get you thinking about something. So we checked into a hotel and slept for a few hours, and then I got in the van and trundled out of Rouen. And the radio in this crappy old Ford Transit we bought broke immediately. And so I had nothing but 8 hours of silence and the sound of the road and my own thoughts for 8 hours as we drove down to this rented house. And by the end of that drive, in which I'd just been mulling over this quote and this thing, whatever, and thinking, what if Rouen? What if ruin? A man has got in ruins. What if ruin was a place, an actual place? And I started, and that was it. And by the end of that journey, I had the end of the book. I had what is the big revelation at the end of Sanctus. What bigger subject than the origin of religion and mankind's relationship with it? So I just kind of leapt in, really.
You went for the big one.
I did, and it worked out. So it was also the right thing to do.
Well, that's right. Yeah, this is another thing that's come up on the show before is this idea. Some people are really keen, or they really try to write to the market, etc., or go with something that they think they should write. Following trends and things like that. When it is usually best to follow your heart or your head, or however you want to describe it, and go for the thing that you're passionate about.
Well, I think all writers are readers first. Before any writer embarks certainly on a book, you spend years, decades reading stuff. And so you're a really good reader. You are a very, very finely attuned reader. Which is why reading your own stuff is so painful, because your very keen reader senses can spot your bad writer senses like a mile off. But that said, I think really when you're writing, you should be writing for the reader in yourself, of like something that is going to appeal to you as a reader, and something that you haven't read before, and something that is surprising, and something that is arresting and original, That's it. You're trying to write something that as a reader you would pick up and go, well, that sounds like an interesting story. I want to read that. Which all, is exactly what you just said, really, is you should just, write. If you're chasing the market or trying to write to a trend, I mean, I think you can do it to a degree, but I can't imagine it's much fun. I'm fortunate in that I've largely so far been able to sort of write things that, but I think my sensibilities are quite commercial anyway. I think they were anyway, and I think they were finely tuned over 20 years of having to write primetime television, where you're competing against everyone else who are also trying to, own those slots. That I just have a keen sense of something that is going to appeal to a lot of people. And I want to be that person as well. I like going to see big Hollywood movies, and I like all the indie stuff as well. But I really love all those big overblown kind of pieces of entertainment writ large, and so that's what I write. And fortunately, there is a market for that in the book world as well as in TV and film and every other creative area.
I completely agree. I mean, speaking of, you're talking about genre writing there and how it's something that you're passionate about and you shouldn't have to be apologetic about it. Have you sort of encountered any snobbery as you've gone along, either from other writers or from, critics or anything like that? Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, to a degree. There's the critics... Well, certainly for my first few books, they very much kind of compared it to Dan Brown, because it's a fast-moving modern thriller with religious undertones. And so inevitably it was compared to Dan Brown, which is, I got that, and that's fine. It's going to be compared to Dan Brown in the same way that if I'd written a legal thriller, it'd be compared to John Grisham.
Yeah, sure.
It's just inevitably that's the comparison going to be made. What I got, though, was, people would use the fact that I'd written a book that could be loosely grouped in the same genre as a way to beat up on Dan Brown endlessly. So they'd review my book. They'd review my book going, oh, here we go, another Dan Brown ripoff. Why anybody would want to write a Dan Brown book? Because he's such, and I get all of that, And so basically I was like, well, it's not really a review of my book. It's a review of Dan Brown and this genre that you don't like because you don't like Dan Brown books. It's like, so that was a bit weird. Also, I think, because I was kind of grouped into those kinds of books, I was, it's very weird, so crime for the longest time was very much looked down upon as a sort of, a kind of tawdry genre. And now it's very much having its moment in the sun as like, oh no, crime's proper. Crime is proper literature. It deals with proper issues and everything. And so it very much is having that thing. But the weird thing is within crime, if you go on Amazon, you see all these millions of subgenres, and there's definitely a pecking order in terms of crime genre. If it's sort of proper kind of gritty police procedural, that kind of thing, that's proper. If it's anything that's slightly not that, then it's not as good as it's not proper. It's not literary like that. It can't be considered to be, and I'm very much in that sort of, unashamedly entertaining area. My stuff is deliberately cinematic to the point. I always find it's a bit weird when people describe books as cinematic because they're not. They're literary by definition. But I get the whole thing of like, they have that same kind of pace, short chapters. And again, I got compared to Dan Brown because I mind always multi-perspective, third-person narrative. So it cuts around a lot, very short scenes, very short chapters. But that doesn't come from copying Dan Brown. That comes from my background in writing screenplays, because if you read a screenplay, it's a page to a page and a half long per scene, and the camera's the POV, so it's objective, so there's a slight change there, but it's in terms of cutting and pacing, it's exactly the same. That's my origins. So I have to a degree, but I did get it from some. So I remember when I did so Sanctus came out, and it was the biggest selling debut thriller in the UK of that year, 2011. And so inevitably, I kind of did the tour on various things. I was never invited to it. I never got on any kind of, debut writers wants to watch panel. I was never invited to any of those. And if I did go to any of those where I did meet people who were on those, they were kind of like, there were some, not all of them, but some of them were quite sneery about the fact of the success of my book. You know, and they were, you know, there was a sense of like, well, my book's clearly better than yours because I've, you know, been nominated for an award and you haven't, so therefore I'm better than you. So why aren't I selling as many as you? And I was just like, well, you know, don't know. I haven't read your book. Yeah. Maybe it's not very good, or maybe it's not, and maybe it's just doing the same kind of thing. I mean, I think, you know, there are a lot of police procedurals out there that I can't read, no matter how well read they are, because it's the same story. Yeah. It's the same story, and I'm not being told a new story. And it doesn't matter how poetic or how soul-searching the main character is. It is in itself a cliche. And I think there's a danger with people are kind of like sucked into the idea of, you know, this notion of writing as some kind of like lofty art. You know, there is artistry in it, but it's a craft like anything. You have to work at it. And, you know, just because you can turn a nice phrase doesn't mean to say you're telling a good story. And what readers like are stories. Readers like good stories. And, you know, most literary fiction, tons of literary fiction, I can't read because nothing happens. You know, it's dull. It's beautifully written, but nothing happens. And it just does not hold my attention. And yet there are there are crime writers. There's writers in every genre, actually, no matter how kind of looked down upon it may be. There are brilliant writers in all of those genres. And the readers will find them. The readers find them. And it's very easy to be dismissive of something like crime formally. And now romance is looked down upon. But like, you know, romance keeps the publishing industry going. If it wasn't for romance readers and writers, you know, the industry would look totally different. So it's very easy to look down on them, but somebody's writing them extremely well, and some people are reading them. You know, and you know, it's funny. I read the Thornbirds recently. You know, just because I'd never had. What a genius book that is! I mean, that is a brilliant book. That is the unputdownable book. And that's 30 years old now or something, and it's very much seen as, oh, you know, you remember that kind of slightly sappy 1980s
Richard Chamberlain and
whoever
else was in it,
Barbara Stanwyck, being brilliantly kind of matriarchal and bitter, as only Barbara Stanwyck could. But it's just great, and it's just looked down upon. You know, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind is an absolute masterpiece, and it's like, and it still holds up. You read them now, and they're looked down upon because they've sold millions of copies, and because they seem to there'd be sort of romance.
I mean, I think that it's the same with any genre, and it's the same with writing, music, or anything else. I mean, it's not particularly poetic, but if it's good, it's good, and you know, that's regardless of what genre or what form it takes. If it's well done, then it's well done, and it deserves whatever praise and success comes its way, really.
Genre has only arrived because people need to organise libraries and bookshops. Yeah. That's the reason genre is there. It's because they need some kind of form of subdivision beyond books. But in terms of reading, I think, you know, if you could just forget all that kind of stuff, really, there's two genres of books. There's good books and bad books, and that's it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Okay, let's just take a very quick break there to remind you that we're still looking for more book bloggers to send their book reviews to feature on Book Bloggers Corner. It just needs to be a decent enough sound recording of you reviewing a book. We need them to be around 3 minutes in length. You can record it with your phone in a quiet room and send us the final file, and I'll edit it into the show. It's a great way to share your blog with a wider audience, and I know that the bloggers we've featured so far have really got a kick out of doing it. You can find more info at joinedupwriting.co.uk, or you can drop us a tweet at JU Podcast or me at Mr. Kelly2U with any questions you might have. Right, let's get back to the final part of Simon's interview, where I asked Simon about his upcoming TV show Written in Blood and how it came about.
This friend of mine, she was developing ideas for original programs for CBS Reality. And they come up with an idea of a kind of crime writer, true crime crossover. And they were working with a kind of fairly well-known author, whose name I will not mention, to protect the innocent and indeed the guilty. And they'd come up with a sort of idea about how, you know, sort of writing crime and figuring out plots is very similar to sort of the way that police work to solve crimes, and also how often true crimes inspire fictional crimes. You know, you base characters or things on things that really happened in crime books. CBS Reality liked this generally as an idea, whereupon unnamed author decided they didn't want to be involved anymore. Whereupon my friend rang me because she knew me from TV days and knew that I was a crime writer now and was moved in that world. I think initially just to sort of say, well, she kind of jokingly said, would you take over? And I kind of laughed because I'm not anywhere near as big a name as this person who they'd originally had involved. And I said, but, let me think about it. And she said, just do a screen test, just to put you on. And I'd done bits and bobs, and I did some things for HarperCollins, some online things where I interviewed other authors. There's loads of things online of me where I've been at festivals and things doing presentations. So I kind of sent some links of that. And she said, I think it's good. I think you could do it. So I went up to Manchester where the company's based and did a screen test this was sort of November of last year, and it was cold. So I was walking around in this big French army surplus coat, firefighter's surplus coat that I've got, which I wear. And I was kind of, just because that's my coat. And I was kind of walking around and talking about myself and, whatever. Anyway, they showed this to the channel and they went, great. No, he's great. He's great. We really like him. We really like the coat. We really like the coat.
So it's the coat that got you the job, really? Yeah,
maybe. But also the other thing, and then in talking to this friend of mine, they'd rejigged the program, and it was sort of because I said, I can't. I've only written 5 books. I had 4 books out at that time, 5 books. And I said that's not enough to sustain 10 hours. I can't come up with enough points of reference. And I said also, so it's just not going to sustain for 10 hours. It's just going to get very thin very quickly. But I said, I thought the best thing to do would be to have a different author every episode, because I said then you'll get some really big names, which is what you need anyway for the PR of it. You'll be able to get someone from all the big publishers, so you can then when the show comes out, you can just use my producer's head, use all of their resources to get the word out, because there'll be everyone will be talking about it. I said, and also you'll be able to cherry pick some really good stories, from maybe lesser known authors. And I said, and then you'll get really strong shows, because you will be able to there will be authors who absolutely have got a crime that got under their skin that they ended up writing a whole book about it, and they'll be able to talk chapter and verse about it. They're all brilliant storytellers, so they'll tell the story really well. So that's kind of how it came about. So they got commissioned based on that, and then I sort of asked a bunch of people I knew who I thought be interested, who might be interesting as well, if they did have any true crimes. A lot of them didn't. They said, no, I make it all up, or they had like one small, or some of them had really good crimes, but they're not solved. They had to be solved because for legal reasons, if you make a whole program about something and it's unresolved, inevitably you make some kind of leaps at the end of going, well, I think possibly this person was involved. It's legally, it's very hard to say that. And also, what if, like, the day before the show goes out, they make an arrest on that case? You have to pull the whole show because it's all sub judice, So it was very strict. So with that, it had to be a solved case. It had to be modern. It had to be UK, and they had to have based a book on it. We managed to get 10 together, and so I've spent the last couple of months, 3 months off and on, filming it all over the UK. And of course the thing is, because they like the coat, even though we're filming in June and July, I had to have the bloody coat on. So I'm wandering around with this coat, even if it's for the opening piece to camera, I sort of have the coat on, and then off it comes.
Does he always sweat that much? Yeah.
It's like, he looks shifty. Look at him, sweating. Look at him. I know.
You look guilty the whole time.
I look hot. Not in a good way. So that's how that came about. And yes, and it comes out on September. The first one is the Mark Billingham one, and it's 10 o'clock Sunday night on September the 3rd. Is the first one. Then it goes one every week for the next 10 weeks. Old school, not like a binge watch. It's like you have to wait the next week for it to come out.
You have to wait for the next chapter. Well, that sounds...
And there's some amazing stories in it. I mean, there really are. It's been brilliant to make and just hang out with authors and, get into them. We go to the locations where the crimes happen. So,
some great stories and some great authors as well. It sounds really good.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a win-win. The stories are great. The authors are great. You get a bit of an insight into their writing methods as well and how they work. So it's a bit like what you're doing with your podcast. It's a bit like that, but obviously in a much smaller TV form, where you have a little section on who they are and how they write, and there's always a little bit of a forensics section as well, because every case there's some kind of evidence, chain of evidence thing that opens the case up, and we talk a bit about that. So we talk about things like cell mass data collection and familial DNA,
the technical stuff. Yeah,
so there's a bit of that. Something for everyone. It's good. I've loved making it, and I hope people watch it because it is good.
It sounds great. Yeah, it sounds great. And so obviously you spent a lot of time speaking to other writers, you mentioned there, and a lot of other authors. So as we just kind of wrap this up, just to kind of finish things off, what would you, if you had one piece of advice for people just starting out on their journey like you were, 8 or 9 years ago or whatever, what would it be, would you say? What's the best piece of writing advice you could sort of give people?
I would say don't worry too much about the first draft being any good. Because I think a lot of people, again, there's this constant war going on between the very highly developed reader sensibility you have and the massively underdeveloped writer sensibility that you have that is constantly learning and trying to catch up and never will. And the tension between those two perspectives, internal perspectives, can often make you endlessly rewrite something. You write something, first 50, 100, 200 pages, and then you stop and go, well, I'll just rework these until they're perfect before moving on. And you can end up just spending your life rewriting 200 pages, polishing them. The thing is, you don't know what you're polishing until you get to the end. So you just need to plow on through and get to the end. Even if there's massive holes in it, even if you know that what you're writing in that last third or last quarter is awful. It's often the last third quarter that's awful, actually. The opening's good. The second bit sort of starts to meander. You kind of know the ending, but it's that third quarter that
I
just...
I completely agree, yeah.
It's that's
having just finished a really ugly first draft of a crime novel, I completely agree. That pretty much sums up my experience of it.
It's that bit. It's always that bit.
It just goes off. Yeah, it just kind of goes off the rails for a bit, and you think, well, hang on. Where am I going with this? I need to get back to the end that I've kind of got planned and sort of know where I'm going. So I can.
But the thing is, in TV it was always the same. So like if you're making so Written in Blood is a commercial hour. So a commercial hour breaks down into 4 parts. Sort of shortish first part, 2 fairly decent sized middle parts, and then a shortish end part. It's that third part that's always the one that causes problems. And it's the same in writing. And so I think, partly because of my experience of that, with my first book, Sanctus, when I got to that part, I just got my head down and waded through it. I just waded through that part, just pushing it forward, writing, making sure that I was writing more every day when I was on that final push, because I knew where it was going and I just needed to get there. And then when you finish it, you've got a first draft, you've got it, it's done. You can then edit it, because 99% of it writing is rewriting, and you can just put it to one side, go and do something else, then come back and look at it, read it as a oneer, and it's so obvious the stuff that so much stuff can go straight away. But you can only know the stuff that needs to stay if you've got the whole thing down. So that would be my biggest advice: is just write a first draft. I know some writers who call it a zero draft, and don't even show it to anyone. They just write it fast and dirty and just get it down. And have here whole sections where they'll write in capital letters, something cool happens here, or
yeah, I've done that.
Or main character encounters a setback. Yeah. It's fine. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Don't get bogged down for months trying to figure what that is, because often you will figure it out much quicker once you get to the end and go, oh yeah, of course the setback there means it has to.
Yeah, somehow gets out of the room. I've used that one before.
Yes, it's hard to do, but again, what it is you've got these warring psyches, your reader psyche and your writer psyche, and the reader psyche is going, no, you can't move on with the story until it's all worked out, and your writer psyche just needs to slap your reader psyche down and go, shut up, I'm writing, I don't need to write it in a linear way. Or not strictly linear, that's the thing. You read in a linear way, but you don't necessarily need to write in a linear way. But just get the first draft down.
That's a great piece of advice, and it's a good place for us to wind things up. So just in terms of where people can find stuff about you online, how can they connect? I know you're on Twitter and other things. Just tell us how they can get in touch.
Well, the good thing about having a strange name like Simon Toyne is that there aren't many of us around. So if you Google my name, all of my stuff comes up. So I think my website comes up first, and my Facebook comes up second. I'm on Twitter. It's all Simon Toyne or Simon Toyne author. So if you Google me, you'll find all of my various social media outlets.
Brilliant. I'll put all that stuff in the show notes as well. But it's been great speaking to you, and I think you're going to hang around just briefly, just for our little epilogue question. I've got one more little topic that I wanted to cover off with you. But for now, Simon Toyne, thanks a million. That's great.
Thank you.
So that was Simon Toyne. Thanks a lot for joining us, Simon. Really appreciate it. It was a fun chat, and you should also look out for our little extra conversation with Simon next week for Simon's epilogue, where I asked Simon about some of the specific challenges and benefits of writing a series of novels. It was really interesting stuff. So that's it for this week, other than another quick reminder to keep up the good work sharing the show on Twitter, Facebook, or even with good old-fashioned word of mouth. I know there's loads of you listening to this who, like me, are full of good intentions to leave reviews or ratings for books you've read or podcasts you've listened to, and, just like me, you get busy and you forget. But just like book reviews for authors, iTunes ratings and reviews are so important for us little podcasters. It's no exaggeration to say it takes you less than a minute to do and makes a huge impact, both in terms of letting me know what you like about the show or what you would like to see improve, but more importantly, it helps other potential listeners to find the show. So even if you haven't got time now, or if you're listening whilst driving or something like that, make a mental note or set yourself a reminder to do it, and you'll make me very happy, but you'll also feel like you've done your good deed for the day. Other than that, keep getting in touch, keep sending the book reviews and letting me know what you're up to. You can reach us on Twitter at JU Podcast, or me personally at Mr. Kelly to you. We're on Facebook, which is just Joined Up Writing Podcast, and on the web, joinedupwriting.co.uk. And that's pretty much it for this week. So thanks for listening to the Joined Up Writing Podcast. Let's get joined up. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.